The rain poured heavily as Amina walked down the street, her hijab clinging to her face. She could hear the whispers, the muffled laughter, the mocking voices that followed her wherever she went. "Why do you cover yourself like that? It's the 21st century," one girl sneered. "Do you even have hair under there?" Another chuckled, nudging her friend. Amina's heart clenched, but she kept her head high. She had faced this ridicule before. At school, in the market, even on social media. Strangers felt entitled to judge her, to make fun of her modesty, as if her hijab was an invitation for their opinions. Inside, she fought battles they couldn't see. Some nights she cried herself to sleep, questioning if she was strong enough to endure this constant scrutiny. Other times, she felt a fire inside her, reminding her that she wasn't just wearing a piece of cloth, she was carrying her faith, her identity, her devotion to Allah. One afternoon, as she sat alone in the library, flipping through the pages of a book, a shadow fell over her. She looked up to see Layla, one of the most popular girls in school, standing over her with arms crossed. "You know," Layla began, smirking, "you'd be really pretty if you just took that thing off." Amina's fingers tightened around her book. She took a deep breath and smiled. "And you'd be even more beautiful if you had kindness in your heart." For a moment Layla's face twisted in surprise. She wasn't expecting Amina to answer with such confidence. "Kindness?" Layla scoffed. "I'm just being honest." "And so am I," Amina said gently. "Modesty isn't about hiding beauty. It's about honoring it. I wear my hijab for Allah, not for people's opinions." Layla rolled her eyes and walked away. But Amina noticed something. Her words had struck something in her. Days turned into weeks, and Amina continued to carry herself with grace. She ignored the taunts, the stares, the judgment. Instead, she focused on her studies, her prayers, and her inner peace. One day, a sudden tragedy struck the school. A serious accident left a student in critical condition, and the entire school was shaken. That student was Layla. As she lay in the hospital, surrounded by doctors, many of her so-called friends disappeared. The same people who laughed with her at others' expense weren't there for her when she needed them the most. Amina, however, did not forget. She visited Layla, bringing her flowers and a small handwritten note with a Quranic verse. "Verily, with hardship comes ease." 94:6. Layla stared at the note for a long time. Then, with teary eyes, she whispered, "Why are you here, after everything?" "Why?" Amina smiled. "Because my faith teaches me compassion, even for those who mock me." From that day forward, Layla saw Amina in a different light. She saw her strength, her kindness, her unwavering faith. Months later, when Layla returned to school, she walked up to Amina and said softly, "I don't think I'll ever forget what you did for me." She hesitated before adding, "And I respect you more than I ever did before." That moment was more valuable than any validation from the world. Amina didn't need people's approval. Allah had already honored her in ways no human could. The weeks that followed were different. Layla no longer laughed when others mocked Amina. In fact, she even told her friends to stop when they made rude comments about her hijab. At first, people were surprised. Layla, the girl who once sneered at Amina, now defended her. It didn't make sense. But Layla had changed. Her time in the hospital had made her see life differently. She had realized how temporary popularity was, how the same people who cheered for her in good times vanished when she needed them the most. One afternoon, as Amina walked toward the school gates, she heard footsteps rushing behind her. "Amina, wait," Layla called. She stopped and turned around. Layla caught her breath before speaking. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course," Amina said, adjusting her backpack. Layla hesitated. "How do you do it? How do you stay so strong? Even when people laugh at you, even when they judge you, you never break. I used to think wearing the hijab made you weak, but now I see it takes real strength." Amina smiled. I won't lie to you, Layla. There were days when I cried, when I felt like I didn't belong, when I wondered if it would be easier to just take it off and blend in. But then I remembered why I wear it. Why? Layla asked, genuinely curious. Amina's eyes softened. Because I want to please Allah. Because when I cover myself, I take control of my own body. The world no longer gets to define my beauty. I define it through my faith. And every time someone mocks me, I remind myself of something my mother once told me. When you walk toward Allah, the world will push against you. But if you keep walking one day, the same world that mocked you will respect you. Layla was silent for a long time. She had always seen the hijab as a restriction, something forced, something limiting. But for the first time, she saw it as a choice, a statement of confidence, a symbol of strength. I wish I had that kind of faith, Layla whispered. You can, Amina said gently. Faith isn't about being perfect, it's about trying, even when it's hard. Layla looked down, deep in thought. Amina could see the struggle in her eyes, the battle between her past self and the person she was becoming. Can we maybe hang out sometime? Layla finally asked, almost shyly. I feel like I have so many questions. Amina smiled warmly. Of course, I'd love that. From that day forward, things changed. Layla became one of Amina's closest friends. She no longer cared about fitting in with the crowd. She found herself drawn to something deeper, kindness, sincerity, faith. Months passed, and then one day, something happened that Amina never expected. Layla showed up at school wearing a hijab. The whispers started immediately. The same people who once mocked Amina now turned their attention to Layla. Is this a joke? Someone scoffed. Did Amina brainwash you? Another sneered. Layla only smiled. No one brainwashed me. I made this decision on my own. Amina's heart swelled with emotion. Layla had found her own path, her own strength. Later that day, as they walked side by side, Layla turned to Amina and said, You were right. The world pushes against you when you walk toward Allah. But you know what? What? Amina asked. Layla smiled. I'm still walking. And with that, Amina knew that no matter how much the world mocked, no matter how many people misunderstood, Allah would always raise the honor of those who stayed true to their faith. Days turned into weeks, and Layla continued wearing the hijab with quiet determination. The whispers hadn't stopped, and the judgmental looks still followed her. But she had found something far greater than people's approval. She had found peace. One morning, as Amina and Layla walked together to school, Layla sighed. It's funny. I used to be the one making fun of hijabis. Now I'm the one being mocked. Amina glanced at her friend and smiled. How does it feel? Layla chuckled softly. Liberating, but also terrifying. It's like I'm walking through fire, but I know there's something beautiful on the other side. Amina nodded. That's how faith works. It tests you before it blesses you. That day, during lunch, a few of Layla's old friends walked up to their table. They didn't look happy. So, this is it? One of the girls, Sarah, said, arms crossed. You've officially joined the hijabi squad? Layla put down her spoon and met Sarah's gaze calmly. I've officially started making my own choices. Yes? Sarah scoffed. Seriously, Layla, a few months ago, you were the one telling girls to take it off. Now you're covering up like some oppressed saint? Layla took a deep breath. You know what's funny, Sarah? I thought hijab was oppression too. But now I see it's freedom. When I dressed for attention, I felt like I had to compete with every other girl, like my worth depended on how much I revealed. Now I dress for myself, for my faith. And I've never felt more in control. Sarah rolled her eyes. Oh, please. You're just trying to act all holy now. Amina leaned forward, her voice gentle but firm. Choosing modesty doesn't make us better than anyone else. It just means we're walking a different path. And Layla's choice deserves respect, just like anyone else's. Sarah hesitated. For a moment, Amina saw something flicker in her eyes, doubt, maybe even admiration, but it was gone just as quickly. She turned on her heel and walked away, muttering something under her breath. Layla exhaled slowly. "Well, that went better than I expected," Amina grinned. "Give it time. People always resist what they don't understand." But as the days passed, something incredible happened. One by one, students who used to mock Layla started approaching her in private. Some whispered words of encouragement. Others asked quiet questions, curiosity replacing their judgment. One girl, Nadia, even confessed, "I've always wanted to wear hijab, but I was too scared of what people would say. Seeing you do it, it makes me think maybe I can too." Layla's heart swelled. And then came the biggest surprise of all. One evening, as Layla was leaving the mosque after Maghrib prayer, she spotted her mother waiting outside. Her mother, a woman who had never worn hijab, a woman who once told Layla that covering up was unnecessary in modern society, was looking at her with tears in her eyes. "You remind me of your grandmother," her mother whispered. Layla froze. Her grandmother, whom she barely remembered, had been a devout woman, known for her kindness and deep faith. "I used to argue with her about hijab," her mother continued. "I told myself it wasn't important, that I didn't need it. But when I see you standing so strong, I see the strength she had, and for the first time, I wonder if I was wrong." Tears welled up in Layla's eyes. She reached for her mother's hand. "It's never too late, Mama." Her mother squeezed her fingers, and in that moment, Layla knew her journey was not just changing her own life. It was touching others in ways she had never imagined. And just like that, the girl who was once mocked for her hijab had become a source of honor, not just for herself, but for those around her. In the following weeks, Layla couldn't stop thinking about her mother's words outside the mosque. It was the first time she had ever seen her mother question her own beliefs. At home, things were different now. Her mother no longer commented on her hijab or tried to convince her to take it off. Instead, she observed Layla quietly, watching how she carried herself, how she remained patient despite the judgment she faced. One evening, as Layla was reciting Quran in her room, her mother knocked on the door. "Can I sit with you?" she asked hesitantly. Layla's heart skipped a beat. "Of course, Mama." Her mother sat beside her and ran her fingers over the Quran's cover. "I haven't read this in years," she admitted, her voice soft. Layla smiled. "Would you like me to read to you?" Her mother hesitated, then nodded. Layla began reciting a verse from Surah Al-Baqarah. "And when my servants ask you concerning me, indeed I am near. I respond to the invocation of the supplicant when he calls upon me." 2186. Her mother closed her eyes. "I used to love that verse," she whispered. "I used to believe in it." Layla placed her hand over her mother's. "You still can." Tears welled up in her mother's eyes, but she quickly wiped them away. "It's not that easy, Layla. I spent so many years ignoring my faith. I don't even know where to start." Layla squeezed her hand. "Start with one step, Mama. Even if it's just a single prayer, a single dua, a single moment of remembrance. Allah never turns away from those who return to Him." Her mother looked away, her emotions raw. But that night, Layla saw something different in her, an internal battle, a longing for something she had lost. Days passed, and small changes began to appear. Layla noticed her mother watching YouTube videos about Islam when she thought no one was looking. She caught her flipping through an old Quran one afternoon, her fingers tracing the Arabic letters. Then, one evening, as Layla was preparing for Maghrib prayer, she heard a quiet voice behind her. "Can I pray with you?" Layla turned around in shock. Her mother stood in the doorway, her eyes filled with uncertainty. Tears burned in Layla's eyes as she nodded. "Of course, Mama." For the first time in decades, her mother stood beside her in prayer. Her movements were hesitant, her voice shaky as she whispered the words of Surah Al-Fatiha. But as she bowed and placed her forehead to the ground, something inside her broke. Years of distance of hesitation, of guilt melted away in that single moment of submission. When they finished, her mother sat on the prayer mat, her hands trembling. "I forgot how peaceful this feels," she murmured. Layla took her mother's hands and held them tightly. "Allah never left you, Mama. You just had to find your way back." Her mother broke into quiet sobs, and Layla held her, whispering reassurances. That night, Layla realized something profound. She had once thought her hijab was just about herself, just about her own faith, her own struggle, but in choosing to walk toward Allah, she had unknowingly inspired others to do the same. Her journey had been mocked, ridiculed, challenged, but in the end, Allah had honored her in a way she never expected. And as she looked at her mother, a woman rediscovering her faith after years of being lost, she knew one thing for certain. When you take a step toward Allah, He brings the right people, the right moments, and the right blessings into your life. Layla had walked through fire, but now she stood in the light. Months passed, and Layla's home became a place of quiet transformation. Her mother, once distant from faith, was now waking up for Fajr, even if it was just to sit beside Layla as she prayed. She wasn't perfect, and she still had days of doubt, but she was trying, and that was enough. One afternoon, as they sat together drinking tea, her mother hesitated before speaking. "Layla, I've been thinking." She placed her cup down and took a deep breath. "I want to wear the hijab." Layla's heart skipped a beat. She had never pressured her mother, never even suggested it. But here she was, making the decision on her own. "Mama, are you sure?" Layla asked softly. Her mother nodded. "I've spent years convincing myself that I didn't need it, that I was fine without it. But the truth is, I feel like something's been missing. And every time I see you walk so confidently in your hijab, so at peace, I realize that I want that too." Tears welled in Layla's eyes. "Mama, I'm so proud of you." The next day, they went shopping together for scarves. Layla helped her mother pick soft, elegant colors, ones that would make her feel beautiful and comfortable. As her mother wrapped the hijab around her head for the first time, she stared at herself in the mirror, her hands trembling. "I feel different," she whispered. "You look beautiful, Mama," Layla said, smiling, "and not just on the outside." Her mother wiped a tear from her eye. "I never thought my own daughter would be the one to guide me back to Allah." Layla shook her head. "It wasn't me, Mama. It was always Him." That evening, as they stepped out of the house together, mother and daughter, both wearing hijab, Layla felt something shift in the universe. The same streets that once whispered about her, the same people who once mocked her, no longer mattered. Because this journey wasn't about them. It was about faith, about finding peace in a world that constantly tried to take it away. As they walked toward the mosque for Maghrib prayer, her mother reached for her hand and held it tightly. "Thank you, Layla," she whispered. Layla smiled. "For what?" Her mother took a deep breath. "For reminding me that it's never too late to return to Allah." Layla squeezed her mother's hand, her heart full. And with that they stepped forward, two women, two believers, walking toward the light.